Um, I thought that I would talk to you this afternoon briefly about how the jewelry market, how the international jewelry market, from my loop, I mean from my side of the business, has moved from Europe and America to Hong Kong. Then I'll tell you, I think, why I think it has happened. And then finally, I thought I would tell you what I see the needs of the business are and why I think the Hong Kong Jewelers Association and you, the members of the association, can play a big role in the development of the jewelry market because it's badly needed in Europe and in America. So from Geneva to New York, where Geneva has been for a long time the center in our little world of the auction business. The auction business is about between Christie's and another auction house whose name I've forgotten now, but which is also operated in this business, about $1 billion a year. And until very recently, most of the big jewelry auctions of the world were held in Geneva. Why were they held in Geneva? Simply because Geneva was a little bit like Hong Kong, a free port. You can import jewelry very easily without paying taxes. You can export jewelry very easily. And from 1968, when the first jewelry auction took place, to about 1985, 1986, Geneva was the center for important jewelry auctions. It's quite amusing the way it started. It started in 1968 because the chairman of Christie at the time managed to get a great collection for sale, that of Nina Dyer. Nina Dyer was the wife of Prince Aga Khan. She committed suicide in Paris by throwing herself out of a hotel, very near the Cartier shop, as a matter of fact, and the jewelry had to be sold at auction because she had died. We won the deal against the French auctioneers, but suddenly we realized that we couldn't sell it anywhere because there were taxes to import the jewelry in every country. In England, where Christie's was at the time, there was a 20% tax, and this was the only country in the world where we operated. So our lawyers very quickly looked around the world for a place where we could import jewelry without paying taxes, and two countries came up, Hong Kong and Switzerland. Well, this is 1968. Hong Kong was a long way from Europe. There must be about 10 flights a day today, and people go to Hong Kong, like they cross the bridge to go to, where were we? We are in Central, in Kowloon. But in 1968, it was a little bit more complicated to go to Hong Kong. You had probably take 3 or 4 planes, get 3 or 4 days later there. So Hong Kong was out at that time, and Geneva made it. And it made snowball. After a big successful sale, there was another, and Geneva became, par hasard, an important center, but for the reason that Geneva was a tax-free port. Now, what happened since? And what happens since, if we can get the next slide, which is, I hope, no, not this one. No. Here we are. What happened since, if you look at the evolutions of sales between Geneva, New York, and Hong Kong, which are the 3 big centers for jewelry auction today, and you could see Hong Kong being the first little red and white figures, column. You can see that year after year after year, in 2005, sales were relatively low. They were about $65, $70 million, but you could see that Geneva and New York dominated, and slowly Hong Kong takes a more and more important place on the route of the auction world. In 2010, it even dominated the traditional market in Geneva and New York. In 2011, it also dominated because if you see the little white mark here on the blue column, which showed the New York sales, in fact, this was the Elizabeth Taylor year, the Elizabeth Taylor sale. So one sale alone did $150 million. So if you take off that Elizabeth Taylor sale, which was really a one of a kind, probably once in a lifetime, that year also, Hong Kong in 2011 dominated the market. And finally, this year in 2012, we just finished our sales in Hong Kong in this very building about a week ago. Hong Kong came in as number 2, way ahead of New York, and a little bit below Geneva. Here again, that little white line shows one stole in Geneva for $20 million. So of course, when you have one item for $20 million, it distorts the figures a bit. But all this to say, Hong Kong is either number 1 or number 1 ex aequo today, but in less than 10 years, Hong Kong has really become a major center for jewelry auctions. And I think that's an important factor which you should all take into consideration when developing your business. Because twice a year, come to Hong Kong in November and in May, major collectors, private collectors and dealers from China, of course, but from all over the world. And Hong Kong has become, again, an important auction center because of all these clients who come here twice a year for these auctions. So what has happened here? Well, these are a few examples of stones sold not in the traditional center, but in Hong Kong. Why? Because the vendors, the owners of the stone, specifically requested that the jewelry be sold in Hong Kong and not in the traditional center. 2009 made the headline with a 5-carat pink diamond, which belonged to someone from Connecticut in the US. And that person approached us, said he wanted to sell his diamond, but the only condition he would sell with us was if we sold it in Hong Kong. It wasn't us who suggested it. The client, the vendor, having studied the market, decided that Hong Kong was the right place to sell it. Well, he was right. We took the stone for $800,000 per carat, so about $4 million, and it sold for over $2 million per carat. Buyer, Chinese collector, underbidder, Chinese collector, underbidder, Chinese collector. The Europeans couldn't touch it, the Americans couldn't touch it, everyone was in town to buy this, to try to buy this important stone, but it was purchased by somebody from not very far from here. Another example was this natural pearl necklace, again, so not a cultured pearl necklace, but an oriental pearl necklace, which was sold for this for this extremely high price of $3 million, again, in Hong Kong. About 6 months ago, we were approached by the owner of the Martian pink diamond. This stone had been sold in 1955 by Harry Winston to a private American collector. And this was the year when the American landed on the moon. So this is why this diamond was called the Martian diamond. The American bought it for about $400,000 or $500,000, kept it for a few years, decided to sell it because he was getting at what the English called at the end of his collecting cycle, meaning that he was getting a bit old. So they decided to sell the stone. Again, wanted to sell it at auction, contacted both auction houses. Our competitors offered New York. It was an American buyer. We offered Hong Kong. We won the deal, and the stone was sold for this very high price of $17 million, so nearly $1.5 million per carat, again, in Hong Kong. And lastly, a week ago, we offered here in Hong Kong this pair of pear-shaped Colombian emeralds of 23 carats each, which was sold for nearly $100,000 a carat. They were absolutely perfect stone, extremely clean, purchased by a Chinese collector. So, a few examples, but before I suggest to you a recipe to be more competitive in China and in Hong Kong, I'd like to go back to the basics of what makes the value of a jewel. How do we value a piece of jewelry when we get it? Well, we all know about the 4 C's, a traditional rule of the 4 C's, color, karité, cloth, carat, which we've all learned at school and repeat every day in our offices. But I think today it's not enough, and there are a few more letters to be added to the value of a jewel. And in addition to the value of the stone, which is of course very important, the signature counts for a lot. And here I've indicated on the screen a non-exhaustive list, of course, of companies which, when they sign a piece of jewelry, we see that prices are increased by 10, 15, or 20% for the value of the stones. So, I mean, that's, I think, a first lesson we should all learn in Hong Kong. It could be that there could be Hong Kong-made jewels signed by a famous manufacturer or signed by a famous jeweler who could have the value of the stone be increased by the name of the mounting. We are not yet here in Hong Kong, but I think it's probably a route to follow. It's starting because there are a few important jewelers who are boutique jewelers who do not belong to a big corporation. And I've just put a few on the screen here. I could also have added etc., which Francis Guten mentioned, Edmund Chin, and of course Anna Hu, whom you will hear a bit later this afternoon. And here you see on the screen names of Hong Kong jewelers, or in the case of Viren Bhagat, Indian jewelers, and in case of Jar, Paris jewelers, but boutique jewelers who do not belong to a big corporation. And if one wants to buy a piece from those jewelers, I should go to auction in the second market in case a piece comes up, or they have to make a trip to their shop in Hong Kong, in Paris, or in Bombay to buy a piece of jewelry. And there is a certain chicness now in the world at a dinner party if you wear a jewel by any of those jewelers, because it shows that you traveled all the way to that particular city to buy the piece of jewelry. And it was a little bit more difficult than just going to the next Cartier store or Van Cleef store or Boucheron store. There is room for both houses, of course, but both kind of houses, of course. But I think that's another tip which I think could promote and could develop the Hong Kong jewelers, which Hong Kong jewelers could develop by developing a brand which it will take time to do, but which over 5, maybe 10 years could be recognized. If you look at a brand like Jar, for instance, they've been in the business 30 years. We now sell in the secondary market, so at auction, their jewels for more than they sell in the shop. And we've had a few examples lately where clients putting up for sale a Jar jewel which they had bought 10 or 15 years ago made a huge profit on what they had paid originally from the store. The value of the jewel, we said, came from the stone, came from the signature, but also very often from the provenance. And here are a few examples of 4 jewels where the provenance not made it all, but made a great part of the percentage of the value of the stone. The first one is this great Archduke Joseph diamond, which is dated from the 17th century. We sold it in Geneva less than a month ago for $21.5 million. That's, as you should see on the screen, nearly $300,000 per carat. This is today the most expensive D-flawless diamond in the world. What is it worth? What would it have been worth if it wasn't the Archduke diamond? Probably $200,000 a carat, which is the price of an 80 carat D-flawless today. But the provenance completely changed its price, and it was purchased for this very high price by an anonymous buyer against somebody from the trade, and somebody you might have all heard of before, Muawad, a jeweler based in the Middle East and in Dubai. Another example, you've all heard about this great collection of Elizabeth Taylor, $150 million worth of jewelry sold last year in New York, and one of her great pieces was La Peregrina Pearl, a 16th century natural pearl, remounted by Cartier in the 1960s. And again, this 16th century pearl was sold for nearly $12 million, the most expensive pearl in the world today. Why is that? Because of its provenance. If that pearl had just come up for sale as La Peregrina Pearl, what would it have brought? Well, we don't know. We'll never know. If it had come for sale just as the Elizabeth Taylor pearl, I don't know either what we would have pearled, but the concentration of Elizabeth Taylor and a very old 16th century pearl brought this very high price. What was very interesting is that we kept calling it La Peregrina Pearl, but the day after the auction, a lot of people called us and said, how much did the Elizabeth Taylor pearl fetch? So in a way, the Elizabeth Taylor aura was so big and so large that everyone had forgotten about the 16th century Pellegrina, and it became the Elizabeth Taylor pearl. Another example was this ruby brooch by Jar, which Jar had made in 2003 for Mrs. Safra, a jewelry collector in Europe. He sold it to her for $1,400,000. She loved the brooch, but after a while she got tired of it and approached me to sell it. I thought, well, I'm not sure we'll get $1,400,000 for this brooch. It's a lovely piece, it's Jar. It has a lot of very small stone. The biggest stone was about 3.5 carats. The rest was smaller stones. Beautifully made, but still $1,400,000. I didn't think we would get it at auction. So we passed, and we told her that we didn't think we would sell it. But then she decided, about 6 months ago, to have an auction of all our jewelry collection because she wanted to give the money to charity. And she included in the exhibition and in the show, she included that brooch. The jewelry had to be sold, so it had to be sold without minimum price, without reserve, all the proceeds going to charity. And you can see what it brought here, $4,300,000. Purchased by, I give you three choices. Somebody from France, somebody from Bosnia, somebody from China. You know it all. I don't think I need to continue my speech. China. Underbidder, Bosnia, France. Underbidder, China. We have to continue because you don't know it all yet. And the last example was a crown. You could see on top of the screen here. It's a bit small, which had belonged to Princess Margaret. We had estimated it $200,000 to $300,000, and because of the provenance, Princess Margaret, it broke down. The value of the diamond was about $250,000. It was signed by Gara, which was a good name, but nothing so extraordinary. And it brought $1.7 million because of the royal provenance of Princess Margaret. Now, there is a trend with Chinese jewelers. It's beginning. And I thought I would take three examples here of items which have been sold lately signed by Hong Kong or Chinese jewelers. In fact, on this screen, mostly Hong Kong-based jeweler. The first one, Edmund Chin by Etc., which Francis Guten mentioned earlier on. By the way, I don't know if you know why it's called Etc., which is a French word. And although he's very, very Chinese from Singapore, but he lives here in Hong Kong. His name is Edmund C.T.Z.E. Chin. So his initial is ETC. And ETC, etc. He made this anagram. He said, I'm using anagram, and that's the name now which he uses in the business. And you can see here a very nice pair, very classical pair of emerald and diamond earring, which were sold for nearly $2 million not too long ago. Cindy Chow, another jeweler based in Taiwan, but who works in Hong Kong also. The caption here is wrong. Of course, it's not a 5-carat cushion-shaped diamond, but it's a cabochon sapphire and diamond butterfly, which was sold for $950,000, nearly $1 million. Again, the signature is what brought the money there, not the stone, because the stone was probably worth about $80,000 to $100,000. A diamond necklace by Carnet, recently sold for $80 million. And finally, a suite of jewelry by Jason Koo, another Asian jewelers, sold for $80,000. So, for $50,000. So you see, Chinese names begin to be appreciated in Europe, begin to be appreciated in America, not just here. And I think that's another route one should follow from Hong Kong, is to develop these brands, to maybe create new brands. And I think these brands are so fashionable today that European and American clients will want to go up for them because it is chic to own a piece of jewelry made by an exotic jeweler from Asia. Another phenomenon which I could not talk to you about this morning before I get to the end of my speech is Wallace Chan. Wallace is not a newcomer. I'm sure you know him because he's been around for about 15 or 20 years, but he started his business as a sculptor. And he has become a very, very successful and popular jeweler. He exhibited this year at the Biennale des Antiquaires in France. It was like HKR 12, the big art fair, which is every other year in Paris. You can see here a picture, you don't see it too well, but of the Grand Palais, which is the place in Paris where this exhibition takes place. And Wallace Chan had a booth there. I didn't go, but I was told that the number of people around his booth from 10 o'clock in the morning until 11 o'clock at night was unimaginable. There were more people there than in any other traditional booth. And his show was extremely successful. He was also the first Chinese exhibitor, forget jeweler, the first Asian exhibitor to be admitted in this very snob, I can say it because I'm French, and complicated Biennale des Antiquaires, where if you are not French, if you haven't known the manager for 300 years, and if you do not have very high friends in the government, it's difficult to get. There are only 66 booths because of the size of the place, and about 250 applications every year. But Wallace Chan got in, and as a result, got a fabulous aura. As a result, Polly had an auction of 11 jewels by Wallace Chan a week ago in Hong Kong, and we had 2 jewels which we sold for $100,000 from a jeweler which, again, 3 or 4 years ago in Europe and America were absolutely unknown. So, to end, what I thought could be a key to developing the Jewelers and Manufacturer Association of Greater China business a little bit more. First of all, if you're a manufacturer, I would stick to quality workmanship. We certainly should improve our website, certainly do a lot of communication, but when everything is finished, if the product is not of quality, it won't fly. So there is, as far as I'm concerned, a huge room to be taken by the manufacturers of Hong Kong to improve the workmanship, and then to have the Van Cleef & Arpels, Cartier, Boucheron of this world come here to have their jewels made in Hong Kong, because at the moment there are very few workshops left in Paris. There are very few workshops left anywhere in the world, very few quality workshops, and if Hong Kong could rhyme with the highest quality possible, I think this is a win-win situation. For jewelers, it's using quality stones. Hannah showed me, for instance, a client of hers today at lunch had a beautiful cashmere sapphire, which was, to die for. Well, if you have the choice, I would rather use a cashmere sapphire than a heated Ceylon stone. And then again, the Chinese name and Asian name will rhyme with quality stones. Jar, whose name was on the screen earlier on, Joel Rosenthal in Paris, only uses unheated sapphires, rubies, untreated emeralds, he only uses natural pearls, not cultured pearls. And you know that if you buy a piece of jewelry from Jar, it is of the highest quality. There's nothing wrong with heat-treated rubies. We sell them all the time at auction. But I think if the Hong Kong Jewelers Association would say that we will now have a special line, or each of you will have a special line of the highest quality, I think that would attract clients all over the world. And the developing of a brand, you saw Anna Hu, you saw the other jewelers who've done it. It's the beginning. There are not too many in China or in Asia at the moment, but I think it's a great opportunity to develop a brand which could be very successful, because there is no reason why we should leave it the market to Van Cleef & Arpels, Cartier, Boucheron. Boucheron belong to the same group as PPR, at Christie, so I can say it, but there is no reason why next to these jewelers a Chinese brand could not be developed. And lastly, I know that denigration is a national sport in every industry, and we sometimes wonder, well, in Hong Kong we are very far from Europe and America. We sometimes suffered from the reputation of the Chinese jewelers who use stones which are so and so and whose workmanship is not the greatest. But do not forget that Hong Kong has a unique advantage which is greatly appreciated by the Europeans and the Americans. First of all, it's a free port. It's easy to get in and out, no nonsense, no hassle, no complication, and it's probably, it was like Switzerland, probably the most easy country to do business with. Now it is the only country, because Switzerland has become, because of its position in Europe, position has become a little bit more complicated, a high VAT, exportation complication, which were not the case before, under pressure of the European Union, which was not too happy to see in the middle of Europe a free country. So they got to them, and it's nice to do business in Switzerland, but it's easier to do business in Hong Kong. The second reason is that Hong Kong has an efficient legal system which reassures foreigners. We all know that when we do business in a country where we're not comfortable, there are issues, there are sometimes problems and issues and discussion between partners. Well, in Hong Kong there are courts, easy to get to, proper justice is rendered, and if you are if you are defending a right cause, you will win or you will get a fair judgment. It is not true anywhere else in the world. And finally, Hong Kong has a stable currency pegged to the US dollars. The US dollars is the international currency of our business, of the jewelry business. So for me, Hong Kong is a win-win situation as long as we stick to quality, and in a few years we have this, this sort of buzz in the industry that quality jewelry is made mostly in Hong Kong. Thank you very much.
Thank you.